I'm Lieutenant General Alexandria Graves, United States Department of Defense. Sheriff Rourke let out a dry chuckle, the kind you'd give someone claiming to be the Queen of England. He didn't ask for ID, didn't verify a thing. He just pulled out his baton and jabbed her chest once, twice, then a third time. So I guess this medal's just a toy from a cereal box. Huh. Shut your mouth, turn around. The last poke knocked her silver badge to the concrete. Graves bent down to pick it up without saying a word. She wiped the dust off with the edge of her coat, like brushing away something older than the foundation of this police station itself. She didn't scream, didn't argue, didn't even look at him again. She just spoke calm and precise, like she was testifying in a classified Pentagon hearing today. You chose to cross the one person who can erase your entire career record in under 3 minutes. Rourke didn't get it, didn't care. He'd arrested people for far less and been praised for maintaining order. Graves was handcuffed, shoved into a holding cell, and left alone against a peeling wall. She tapped her watch lightly, the kind of device issued only to generals with autonomous field command. 26 minutes later, a military SUV rolled through the back lot. The man who stepped out didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. He walked straight into the station, unlocked the cuffs from Graves' wrists, then turned to Rourke. "Do you even know who she is?" Rourke started to sweat. His jaw stiffened. He'd always believed he could crush any ego before it rose, but that day, his ego died in silence, staring at the woman he once thought deserved punishment, simply for having the audacity to carry herself with power. The rundown gas station off Highway 287 sat forgotten in the middle of Dry Creek, Montana, the kind of place where the welcome sign had rusted so badly. No one could read the word welcome anymore. Alexandria Graves pulled over when her GPS lost signal. Montana was still one of the few places in America where cell service had to ask the wind for permission to pass through. She opened her car door and stepped out, her heels crunching lightly against the gravel. No one paid her any attention until the police pickup rolled in from behind. Sheriff William Rourke stepped out like the ground belonged to him. His uniform stretched slightly over his gut, and his eyes swept the lot before locking on to the usual target, a black woman standing alone, no military plates, no insignia. His gaze narrowed the way it always did when he saw someone who didn't look like anyone in his mirror. "Your car?" Rourke asked. Not loud, but loud enough to make it clear this wasn't a conversation. Graves turned. Her voice was low, steady, and measured just right. "Yes." "I pulled over to check my signal. Is there a problem?" Officer Rourke took a step closer, hand resting near his belt, where the Glock always waited. He didn't answer, just scanned her, head to toe, then back up again, as if waiting for something suspicious to appear, anything to justify the itch in his fingers. "License and registration?" he ordered. Graves pointed calmly toward the glove box. "In the compartment. I'll retrieve them if I'm permitted." "Oh," Rourke smirked. "So you do know how to ask permission. Then again, firmer license and registration." She opened the door, retrieved her wallet, and handed over both her driver's license and a Department of Defense ID. Rourke took them like they were counterfeit movie tickets. His eyes paused on the words, Lieutenant General. He squinted, then let out a small laugh, not the kind that says surprise, but the kind that says challenge. Well, look here, he muttered, rolling the old toothpick between his teeth. If you're a lieutenant general with the Department of Defense, then I'm the second coming of Jesus Christ. Graves said nothing. She'd heard lines like that before, but not everyone had the nerve to jab a baton into a general's chest 3 times or order her to turn around like a fugitive on the run. Rourke did just that. She didn't resist, didn't raise her voice. She simply exhaled. And maybe that quiet composure was what rattled Rourke the most. He cuffed her with worn-out restraints, tightening them just enough to sting, not enough to bleed, a trick he'd learned back in internal security training, inflict pain without leaving a mark. Sit down and shut up, he said coldly. Out here, you don't need to be anyone. You just need to be who I allow. The words dropped into Dry Creek's thin mountain air like an outlaw's decree, outdated, unlawful, and enforced with the confidence of a man who'd never been questioned. She didn't flinch. Only after Rourke turned away did Graves glance toward her left wrist. A soft press, no sound, no signal. But beneath the metal, a biometric sensor confirmed her identity and triggered a level 3 alert. Thousands of miles away, in a windowless basement in Arlington, Virginia, a monitor flashed orange. General Graves, signal active. Dry Creek had never shown up on any agency's priority map, but now it had just become ground zero for a storm the town had never feared. Until today. Rourke drove Graves back to the station like he was transporting evidence. The cuffs clinked against her wrists while he hummed an old country tune about freedom, firearms, and the greatness of America. Maybe once upon a time, that song meant something to someone. But here, inside the stale, cramped cab of a patrol truck that reeked of local power, it felt more like the soundtrack to a humiliation left to ferment. They didn't speak on the way. Graves didn't need to. She knew after 30 years in uniform that what kept her alive wasn't a gun or a silver star. It was patience. Letting arrogant men sink themselves into the very traps they mistook for strength. When they reached the station, Rourke didn't read her rights, didn't log a report. He just swung the door open and yanked her from the seat like he was offloading cargo rough, fast, and with not a trace of respect. Female cells empty. He called to a young deputy, not even looking in his direction. I'll handle it myself. The deputy, barely a year into the force, caught a glimpse of the words Lieutenant General on her ID, but he didn't say a word. In Dry Creek, your first reflex wasn't to ask questions. It was to follow orders. Rourke slammed the cell door shut and lingered a moment, staring at her through the bars. Not used to seeing the world from the inside, huh? There was a smugness in his voice, like he thought he'd just taught the world a lesson with a padlock. Graves sat down on the wall-mounted steel bench. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Her silence carried more weight than most reports that ever made it to the Pentagon. Do you have a son? Rourke. Her voice came soft, not urgent, not threatening, Just a question, like two neighbors talking in a backyard. He paused just for a beat, then frowned. How'd you know that Graves leaned back? The fluorescent light overhead cast a pale sheen across eyes that didn't blink. Because I once signed a medical emergency redeployment for a private first class named Connor Rourke, wounded in Kandahar. 2 pieces of shrapnel to the abdomen. The field hospital requested priority transport. I approved it. He lived. I'm guessing that was your son. Silence. The air inside the station froze for a few long seconds. That name, Connor, was the reason Rourke quit smoking. The only reason he sent money each month to a veterans nonprofit he never once admitted to supporting. But he said nothing, because saying anything meant admitting she wasn't lying. And for men like Rourke, facts could be forgiven. Rank could not. He turned his back and muttered over his shoulder, "Don't try your little mind games on me. In here, I'm the one holding the key." Graves exhaled slowly, evenly. Her eyes drifted through the bars, outside. The Montana sun was setting, the kind of sunset she'd once seen from a Navy ship in the Pacific, from an observation post in Iraq, and from her Pentagon office window. But today, behind bars, it only confirmed what she'd always known. Sometimes the strong don't need to fight. They just need to wait long enough for truth to unlock the door. In the basement of an office building in Arlington, Virginia, a monitor changed from pending to priority active. An encrypted command gate opened. A classified emergency file was elevated, involving the unlawful detainment of a 3-star general on U.S. soil at Fort Carson, Colorado. A senior operations officer read the alert. The first military SUV rolled out at 1742. No sirens, no lights, no warning. Evening settled over Montana as Graves leaned back against the chipped paint wall of the holding cell in the quiet of Dry Creek. Afternoons usually passed like no one had anywhere urgent to be. But today, something was moving. Not by routine, not by schedule, but by the pulse of a sequence triggered from the wrist of a woman no one in this town truly understood. At the station, Rourke hadn't returned to the holding cell since that question about his son. He was in his office, sitting behind a worn wooden desk, holding a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. He kept telling himself it was nothing, but the way she had said Connor, that wasn't random. It couldn't have been random. A quiet instinct made his palms sweat, but his pride held him in place. Then came a sound from the lot outside, not a siren, not a patrol car's familiar idle, just the crunch of gravel under weighty tires, soft, but enough to make the young desk officer look up. A matte gray SUV rolled through the front gate without slowing down. No lights, no signal, no clearance. But it moved with the certainty of something that belonged here, as if it had only been away for a few years. The man who stepped out wore a dark tactical jacket. He walked straight to the front door. No one asked who he was, because the air around him answered the question before it could be spoken. The young officer started to say something, but all that came out was, Can I help you, sir?" "No need," the man replied. His voice was low, clip the kind that had been practiced 1,000 times, never wasting a syllable. The sheriff's office door opened without a knock. Rourke looked up, ready to assert himself with a sharp word, but the greeting died in his throat. The man's eyes weren't angry, weren't threatening. They didn't need to be. They held a kind of command that made the chair beneath Rourke feel suddenly unstable. The stranger placed a tablet on the desk and swiped across its screen. A military emblem appeared. Below it, priority code, confirmed 3-star personnel, domestic intervention authorized. Rourke didn't grasp everything, but he understood enough to know he was playing the wrong role in the wrong story. "You're holding a lieutenant general from the Department of Defense," the man said. His gaze didn't flicker once. No notice. No uniform. No, Rourke didn't finish. He was cut off, and so you assumed protocol didn't apply. You assumed personal judgment could override federal statute. The words weren't loud, but they landed like a sentence being read aloud in court. No shouting, no clenched fists, just the right words, from the right man, at exactly the right time. The soldier turned and walked to the rear of the station toward the holding cells. When the heavy door opened, Graves was already standing. Not surprised, not rushing, just waiting. Like a commander who knew reinforcements would arrive on time, so long as the system still worked, as it was designed to. "Ma'am," the soldier said, formal and respectful, "your vehicle is waiting outside." Graves gave a slight nod and stepped forward without looking back. Rourke stood frozen in the doorway, watching her like a man who'd just seen a storm he once mocked, now sweeping in without a single warning. The station door closed quietly behind her. The military SUV rolled over the gravel, smooth and steady. No one spoke. No one asked anything more. And that silence, for the first time, was how Dry Creek finally heard the truth. 3 days later, a civilian vehicle with military plates pulled up to the federal building in Denver. No one paid much attention to the black woman in a dark coat stepping out of the back seat, except for the young aide who opened her door and immediately stood straighter at the look in her eyes. Alexandria Graves hadn't come for a meeting. She hadn't come to accuse anyone. She had only one request: that all documents related to the Dry Creek incident be processed properly and archived at the appropriate internal classification level. No press, no apologies, no press conference. In the elevator, the woman beside her asked, "General, don't you want to bring this to the public? It could change a lot," Graves replied after a brief pause. Her eyes fixed ahead. What really needs to change doesn't live in headlines. It lives in how people face their failures when there's no one left to pat them on the back. Back in Dry Creek, Rourke sat in his office staring at a resignation letter no one had asked him to submit, but that everyone knew was already written, just waiting for his signature. Calls from above no longer carried reassurances, just demands for paperwork, deadlines, and accountability. He glanced again at the shift roster, wondering how many people he'd treated the way he treated Graves, the only difference being none of them had the clearance to activate a chain of orders straight from the Pentagon. 1 week later, Graves returned to Washington. Same office, same stiff-backed leather chair, same world maps on the wall whose borders shifted with every geopolitical tremor. The coffee here wasn't any better. But at least it wasn't poured by someone who thought skin tone and wardrobe defined a person's worth. She placed a slim file on the desk, labeled with a handwritten note, "Misuse of authority at local law enforcement level. Recommended diversity-based retraining initiative." No one asked her to write it. No one assigned the task, but she knew it had to be done, not to punish Rourke, but to help prevent men like him from doing it again, especially to those who couldn't remove their own handcuffs. Before leaving the office, she paused to look at her badge, the same one that Sheriff had jabbed with his baton like it was a toy from a cereal box. She picked it up, gently wiped a scuff from the surface, the fluorescent light catching faintly in its reflection. Someone once asked her, after all her years in the military, what weighed on her the most. Her answer was simple. It wasn't life or death decisions, not the battles I survived. It was knowing I had truly forgiven someone who didn't deserve it, not because they asked, but because if I didn't, I'd be the one carrying them with me for the rest of my life. This story ended without anyone being cuffed in public. No reconciliatory hug, no redemption ceremony. But sometimes justice doesn't need a stage. It only needs quiet resolve from those who know their voice doesn't have to shout to be heard. Honor doesn't come from the uniform you wear or the nameplate on your chest. It lives in how you preserve your dignity when others try to strip it away. And true power is the ability to walk away in silence, leaving behind change, without needing anyone to know you were ever there.